It's a true honor to interview Magenta Pixie today, author of Masters of the Matrix, Divine Architecture and the Starseed Template, and The Infinite Helix and the Emerald Flame. And I think you're working on a fourth book, is that correct?
I have released a fourth book. Originally, the fourth book is the one I'm working on, which was supposed to be the fourth book, which follows on from those three. But then I started to bring forward more information, another transmission that was too long to be a video or audio. So that's become a very small book, a very little book, and that was released 2 weeks ago, and that is the Black Box Program and the Rose Gold Flame as Antidote. But it doesn't follow on from the first three. So I am still working on the original fourth book, which is obviously now the fifth book.
Very busy lady.
Yeah.
And you channel in the nine, you call them. Can you explain to me who the nine are?
Yes. So I guess the best way to explain it really is the abstract aspect of myself, the aspect that is outside of time, non-linear, the right hemisphere of the brain, many ways to explain. But when I first communicated with them, I didn't know any of this in a conscious way. I was trying to make a connection with a spirit guide entity. I made a connection with one spirit guide. And then several years later, that one spirit guide morphed into an angelic figure. And then in a very short time, that morphed into 9 angelic figures. So the only way I found out what and who they truly are was by questioning them. So who are you? Are you part of me? This sort of thing. So they are many things. They present as 9 white-winged beings like angels, but then they can lose that form and present simply as universal consciousness, an individualized collective consciousness, but still individual within that. As a source presentation, omnipresent energy, the higher mind, all of those things is what they are, if you like. So,
I'm interested in sentience. That's what I'm really investigating here.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how your sentient state comes into play when you're channeling the nine.
That is exactly the key. That is exactly the amplification I need to find to communicate with, them or this aspect. So you have a sentience that everyone has, which is your life force, your emotional body, if you like. And it's very much when you are, before you sort of wake up to this spiritual or expansive state, your emotions can kind of be very random and can control you, and you don't really understand them. So that's the first level of sentience. But when you come into the connection and the ability to merge the right and the left hemisphere of the brain together or make higher communication, those emotions change. And that sentience becomes like an amplified signal coming out from your emotions and thought. And that is what I am communicating with. So there's sentience within me, which is a subjective sentience, that emotional body. And the 9 are also my sentience, but they are the objective aspect of my sentience, because sentience exists as is. It exists beyond the human body and outside of the human body. The human body and the emotional body and all of the biological makeup is just like an interface or a receiver for that sentient intelligence. So sentience is the key to that communication. And from a subjective human perspective, from my perspective, I feel it like a radio signal, like an amplification. And the emotions, it's all the emotional body, but it is a higher emotion, a broadcast signal that becomes perceivable to me like a kind of a radio wave, I guess, but I see it really as a pattern, a geometric pattern, a web. That's how I see this, and that is the sentience that's moving into the communication between subjective self and objective self.
In terms of how you see it, is it like in sort of in shapes? Is it in a sacred geometry?
Well, that can change. It can be very human in form, so I might see people and animals and fairies and trees and plants, but usually it is more a signal with an intelligence, with a humor, with a love, and it all blends together. So yes, it forms in sacred geometry, it forms into crystallized shapes. I know those to be monadic structures. Sometimes they look like little sort of whirlpools, which are like vortices or little toroidal field shapes. Sometimes it can be number, like mathematics. But overall, it is a signal. It is an interlocking, unified signal or unified field that is everywhere in all things, running through me, and when I open up to that communication, I'm able to perceive it and see it and feel it.
You mentioned toroidal shapes, and you also obviously use the word helical or helix in the title of one of your books. And I've talked to an astrophysicist who also talks a lot about these helical shapes and relates them to consciousness and sentience. So what are they? What's this helix you're talking about?
So the physics side of it is a bit above and beyond me. The Nine always say to me that I have limited understanding of physics, and what I do know of physics is what they have taught me. But what I do, so a physicist would perhaps use the left brain, the left hemisphere of the brain for their processing skills, if you like, and I look at the same thing through the right hemisphere of the brain, the more creative, artistic, experiencing side. So clairvoyantly, if you like, a helix looks to me like a spiral, but when it moves into, you have the double helix, which looks clairvoyantly like a spiral interwoven, you know, like the caduceus, that kind of visual. But when it moves into the next form, as the helix does transform, then there is there's a moving away from form, where you look at form and it becomes pure light. That's what everything is. It's pure light. It's just that's the sentience itself. It's just light. That's how you see it, and you have to move in on that light to be able to see the forms and the structures within the light. So a double helix would be, as I said, this interwoven sort of like this spiral. But that changes form into a triple helix. And then there are these little quantum filaments that come out from that original helix that make many, many other little helices all around the original helix. And eventually, when you move into the infinite helix, you wouldn't be looking at one form anymore. The infinite helix is when you would take the step back and see pure light. And what it is code. It's code inside this light. It is actually what we hold within our DNA structure when it's activated, so it can lie dormant. And often when mainstream scientists look at the DNA structure, they will only be able to decode 5 or 10% of that and call everything else junk. So it's the junk bit, which isn't junk at all. That's the bit I'm talking about, and it contains code. And that code is not just genetic, it goes far beyond the physical body. That code has within it information for you as you live your life, but it also has information in multiple layers of everything. So you can unlock these codes and find out what that information is, and information is pure light. So that's what's inside these helices and these different forms of the helix, which is our DNA.
Fascinating. I want to go more into DNA in a minute,
Okay.
But I'm still wondering, you said sentience was the key, and then you're talking about codes and decoding.
Yes.
So is sentience the key to decoding?
Is sentience the key to decoding? Yes, it is your, I guess I would call the sentience, it's known in more spiritual circles as clairsentience, so it's the way you subjectively perceive. It is your abstract aspect. It is the higher aspect. It is the subconscious aspect unified together. And sentience is the key to it, because when you move into that state of sentience, it doesn't feel like emotion anymore. The emotion we know as humans is very, for want of a better word, basic or crude compared to the true sentience. So we would feel jealousy or hatred or anger or love. But this changes its form and it becomes a unified field of emotion. You can't really give it a name anymore when it gets to that state. It becomes simply a signal or a broadcast, but it is pure sentience that emanates from you, but also you are allowing it to pass through you. It exists outside of you, but the ability to control, or that's really the wrong word, the ability to work with that sentient subjective experience and move that into this broadcast signal is the key to decoding the code. Yes, the answer is yes to that.
Okay, so continuing on with this concept of decoding, which I just find incredibly amazing, is that the key to a conscious shift both individually and maybe even collectively?
It is, it absolutely is, but it is experienced in a subjective and unique way within each person. So you might say to one person, this is the key, and they may disagree because they may see it in a different form or they may not understand. But using that model, yes, it is the key to that shift, to that awareness.
Okay, and you talk a lot about different perspectives and believing that you're right, or having an accurate, say, perspective based on this level of consciousness, but perhaps not on this level of consciousness. So how is that expansion achieved?
How is it achieved? Again, it would be the same thing. It would be working with this clairsentience or sentient aspect of you, the feeling aspect that goes beyond the emotions we feel in the physical form. These feelings become simply and purely a unified aspect of yourself, or all of yourself, that unifies with all things. So you become into this unity. And what you're actually doing on a more scientific level, if I can speak that way, is activating that DNA, or activating the toroidal field around you, which is another expression of one's DNA, but on an external level. Things begin to change, forms change, they activate, they hold more light. The Nine call this light photonic light. That's what they call it.
Okay, well that's interesting. I kind of have in my own mind, it helps me understand it because I'm not a physicist and actually didn't do very well in physics in high school. It's interesting that I'm now really into all of this. But I kind of think of the DNA as a shutter, so to speak, like a camera would have, that allows more light in. And perhaps the more you're able to feel, the more you're able to open the shutter so that more light is streaming in. And is that then activating DNA? How do you feel about that analogy?
So for you, who works obviously with a camera, that's a perfect analogy for you, because you will use what you know. So when the Nine first spoke to me, I was doing a lot of amateur dramatics at the time, and I've grown up in a theatrical family. So they would use theatre terminology in order to communicate with me. So I may have a very different view of what this light is, but for you, the camera shutter is a perfect analogy. It's a complete aligned metaphor, and that's what this is about, because one cannot define this substance or energy or sentience or superconsciousness. One cannot really define it because it is indefinable. When you define it, you actually give it some form, and it is formless form. So we decode that through the sentience, the feeling, also through imagery within our mind, which we perceive as separate. We perceive sentience and feeling and emotion as separate from thought. We perceive thought to be in the brain or the head, and emotion and sentience to be more in the heart or in the, in the belly. We perceive these feelings, these gut feelings. But in truth, they are all one same unified energy, just perceived differently through our senses. So we use metaphor and symbolism to decode this indefinable substance or energy or frequency or pure intelligence. So that is a perfect metaphor for you as you use camera. So that would be the right metaphor for you.
I get it. So metaphor and symbolism makes me think of language.
Yes.
And that's what I hear you saying is the language of this
yes.
so-called decoding
yes.
process, if you will. What is the language of the light?
That's exactly what it is. So when you say language of light, people instantly think, oh, it must be some foreign language or some new form of sound, which it can be, or some hieroglyphic, printed text, which it can be. But what the language of light is frequency. It is the code. The code within that light is its language. And we interact with this and we decode it and perceive it through symbolism and metaphor. Now, some people perceive it through sound. Some people don't necessarily work with the visual. They perceive through sound. Visual would come into it, but they might work with this energy in a musical way, in a toning kind of way. And also other people may work with this substance using other senses, but the most common, the most usual sense is the visual, because this energy comes through our body through the different senses, but in truth these are energy portals which we know as chakras. So we are using the third eye, brow chakra, the pineal gland, in order to decode. So we are using the inner sight, and that's what that is for. So that will be used by everyone. Some people perceive that inner eye as an ear, because it is actually an ear and an eye. So.
Oh, okay. I get it.
Yeah.
You're putting a lot of things together for me today. Something else that I was really curious about is going back to DNA and this word activation. Mm-hmm. Could you go a little bit more into that before we leave that subject, and then we can go on?
Yes. I mean, DNA exists within every single individual. But because it is a living consciousness, it needs interaction in order to be activated. So if you don't have any interaction with it, you haven't seen it, you haven't observed it, and that is the key, observation, whether that's done through the eye, the ear, the senses. You observe, and this can be done in a myriad of ways, an infinite number of ways. So an individual who hasn't activated the DNA will not have stopped to notice it. Their consciousness and their mind is fixed within the physical world and the physical senses. And they create paradigms and belief systems based on the information they get from the physical world. So if a scientist says, we can only decode 5 to 10% of your DNA and the rest is junk, they will instantly take that on board as a paradigm. The rest is junk. It's to be dismissed. It is irrelevant. And that's the thought they have. So they have not observed it. So it remains dormant, which is a good thing. The reason why it's a good thing is that person isn't ready within their psychology and their emotional makeup and their life to be able to have that interaction. It could cause them some traumas. So the DNA remains dormant, but there. always there, and always working for that person. But when that person begins to integrate and transcend the physical dimension, and here's a scientist say, this is junk, and they think, is it junk? I've discovered it is not. And it may not be that idea that comes into their mind. It simply could be that they're visualizing and seeing fairies within nature, or they have connected with sacred geometry, or they are becoming psychic and empathic and feeling energy from other people, or they may connect with crystals. It can be so many different ways. But once they start to observe that superconscious, higher sentient DNA force, it becomes observed, it becomes seen. It can then start to interact with you. So you activate it, and then that occurs in varying degrees. And it's very much like I said from this light. You see form. Without light, you just see form. But then if you move away a little bit, that form will take on a bit of a glow, because you're looking at it from a different dimensional viewpoint, or through inner eyes as well as the physical eyes. And when you move away fully, you see pure light. That's how this scale occurs within the DNA. That's how you interact with it. You see it in different forms, and it transforms. In a sense, it doesn't really transform at all. The DNA has always been as it is. There is really no transformation going on. The transformation is within you and within your subjective experience of it. Therefore, it transforms because it's been observed, and it transforms to match your observation. So that's how I would explain activation of the DNA.
That's interesting, because we talk about it in terms of like being awake or asleep.
Yes.
And what I'm hearing from you is it's perhaps a lot more nuanced than that.
Absolutely. But in the third dimension, we think in a linear way. So people find linear terms to explain these things. So saying that person's awake and that person's asleep is a good metaphor, but a basic one. So yes, there are more nuances, always more nuances, because it's a fractal energy. You open up and open up more and more and more. And the more you open up, you never really, in truth, move in a linear sense from an ignorant person to a fully enlightened person. You are always in the same place. You are just constantly uncovering that fractal. So everyone is in the same place, really, when you look at it from that perspective.
Okay, I see.
But we perceive it as being on a journey of awakening.
Something I wanted to clarify that you just said is a lot of times people perceive it as it is activated by some kind of external force, but actually what I'm hearing from you is DNA is activated by me.
Yes, the external force is a tool. So yes, it definitely does activate you, but it's not. For example, take this crystal. So people will say crystals are DNA activating, and they absolutely are. This is an external force. Now, if you give this crystal to someone with non-activated DNA, if you like, it may actually, the frequency of that crystal and the connection with that crystal may actually begin some DNA activation. It may do nothing. That person may just think, well, what a pretty crystal. Oh, that's lovely. They may not have any connection. A person already activated to a degree will be working with a crystalline frequency, so they will be able to make the connection with the crystal. So that will then activate them more, but it's always you. It's the same with tarot cards. They're not even crystal, they're just pictures. But the images within them, tarot and oracle cards, the images within them give you a picture within your mind. That's then formulated as a visual external projection from your pineal gland, because the pineal gland is not just an eye and an ear, it's also a camera, if you like, a projector. So it projects form. So it doesn't just see form, it creates form as well. The creator and the creation is the same thing. So an externalized thing, be it a person, a crystal, or whatever it may be, is a tool, but you are the one that creates the activation, and you don't need the tools to do it, but the tools, they're here in the third dimension, they are very helpful and very useful.
In that way, are our feelings tools as well? Just like they are a way of also translating the language of the light?
Wow, no one's ever asked me that question. They are. The feelings within the third dimension, the emotional scale, that would be perhaps classed as a tool, even though it's something you subjectively feel. When you move into higher emotion, this higher sentience where the emotional field merges into one broadcast signal or one field, then that no longer becomes a tool in the same way because it isn't external to you. So lower emotion, human emotion, is a tool, but when that becomes activated and unified, it is you. So the tool and you become the same thing.
That's so cool. I just love how it works. I can't get enough of learning more about it. You talked about the emotional scale. Emotions are obviously polarized, and you
Yes.
also talk a lot about polarization.
Yes.
Can you go into that a little bit?
Polarization per se, or polarization in relation
terms
to
of
emotion?
emotion.
Okay. So when you look at polarization in terms of emotion, well, you have an emotional scale that is potentially negative to the overall organism that is you, and an emotional scale that is potentially positive to the overall organism that is you. You have people who choose to balance and work with and focus on a negative stream of emotion deliberately, and they make that a focus for their life, known as a service to self structure. You have people who focus on the positive stream of emotions and make that a focus upon their life. So you have polarity there also. But when you move into this unified aspect of emotion, then just as I was saying, you see form as in this is negative, so this is low vibration, low emotion, this is positive, this is high emotion. But when you move out and see simply light, it is all part of the same scale. So in the higher truth, from the perspective of true sentience, there is no polarization. Polarization is an illusory experience that we need to experience in order to move into individualization as an organism beyond the physical body. The essence of ourselves, known perhaps as the soul, while it is a oneness unified field, it also is able to individualize as an individual construct, and that is the nine. So polarity needs to be experienced because polarity gives you choice. You can't choose between anything if there's no polarity. Also, that unified aspect, that oneness, that source perspective, that true sentience, simply is in a state of being. It's in a state of pure knowing, but it is not aware of whether or not it is sentient or conscious, because it simply is. So it doesn't know what it is, and it doesn't know it. Sentience doesn't know if it's sentient, consciousness doesn't know if it's conscious, because it is simply a pure field. The only way for it to know if it is conscious or sentient is to move into individualization and integration. It needs to have other to be able to look at itself. It's exactly the same as looking in a mirror. If you'd never seen a mirror, I could explain to you what you look like, but you would never really know because you've not seen your face. When you look in a mirror, you think that's me. So it's exactly the same thing. So polarity is experienced here so that we as humans are given the choice to choose between A and B. To know what we are, we look at what we are not, and then we think, well, I'm not that, I'm this. So this gives you the polarity to choose what you are and what you are not, what you want and what you do not want. But all of those experiences that we are going through as individual, subjective, human organisms are part of the grander design, the higher pure sentience, pure consciousness source, learning whether it's sentient or not. We are here to give source that teaching, if you like, that, because we are it. So that's why we have polarity. And polarity changes in each dimension. So in this dimension, in the third dimension that we exist in, the physical dimension, it's very dense and very, very intense and opposing. Fear and love, dark and light, very, very opposing polarity. But polarity can lessen as we move up the dimensional scale. So in the fourth dimension, in the fifth dimension, or whichever way you want to explain the different levels of expansion, like this moving away and seeing form and then seeing light. Within that, there is a change in polarity into eventually a unified presentation where there is no polarity. But polarity also gives you free will, because you can't have free will without choice. So that's another reason why we have it.
I was just going to ask you that question. To me, free will is choice, and that's Christ consciousness as well.
Yes.
Would that resonate with you as an accurate statement?
Choice and free will is Christ consciousness, yes, but it can also be negative also, and outside of Christ consciousness, depending on the different choices, the different polarities you're working with, and how you utilize free will. Because free will, when you are non-DNA activated, your free will is experienced as absolute choice. You choose between A and B. When you move into this unified source, this higher perspective of sentience, this light, your choice and that which is designed for you, if you like, that which is destined, that which has been preordained, is one and the same thing, because you walk in alignment, in perfect synchronicity. So you could say that that is pure free will. You could also say there's no free will there whatsoever, because you're not making a choice anymore. You're walking a path that's already been chosen. So the Nine always say free will and destiny walk hand in hand. They're two sides of the same coin. So free will is quite misunderstood, because some will say there is no free will here in this dimension, in the third dimension. They would be true, because free will has been engineered and orchestrated and controlled and all of those things. Yet we do experience free will when we make choices and we start to activate the DNA, and then we move into pure and utter free will. There is no more freedom than living within that unified expansion. But it already existed, it is infinite, it is timeless, and therefore it's no longer choice in the same way. So there are many ways of looking at that, and it's a scale depending on your perspective. As you said before, there are different perspectives within each octave, within each dimension, or within each level of experience within that sentient self.
Another quick question on polarity. Is it also connected to time? I think I read something that you wrote that suggested that.
So polarity and time are kind of the same thing. How that would be explained is polarity in this dimension is an expression of linear time, because it's either or. And you need to experience linear time in order to make these choices. As you move up into that unified field and you go out of polarity, there's no time anymore. So you could say time and polarity are two different things and are two different sides of the same coin. But from that higher perspective, they are one and the same thing. But only linear time is the same thing as polarity. Non-linear time is the same thing as the lack of polarity, or the true presentation of source, of true reality. What we experience here is an emanation of true reality. And many people call it an illusion, and that is true, it is, but you can lose yourself when you say that. You must anchor yourself in the reality of the third dimension in order to experience it in all its polarity and all its linear time, in order to understand all of the non-polarity and non-linear time. So polarity and time is one and the same thing, but it is difficult for us in the third dimension to see that. And we have to, for me personally, take a more visual landscape to understand what that might mean. So you could say that perhaps polarity is the buildings and time is the landscape the building is in, but it's all one field, one expression.
Is there intrinsic value in the negatively charged emotion?
Yes, there is, because when you're in negatively charged emotion, you will feel bad, feel awful, and you will want to leave it. If you exist purely in bliss and euphoria and ecstasy and joy all the time, it would be you simply being, and you wouldn't know anything any different, so you wouldn't know what you are experiencing. So when you feel the negatively charged emotion, it shows you what you do not want. It shows you what you do want. It shows you what you are not. Or, for the case of a service to self, individual or group, it would show them what they are, because they deliberately work with that. But that's a completely different type of evolutionary experience.
You know, is it through our negative emotions that we are manipulated? Yes,
that is how we are manipulated. Through fear, through worry, through well, it's all fear, really. It's keeping somebody in fear, because what that does, and it's very connected to the question you just asked about awakening and ascension and moving, it's keeping you from that. It's taking you away from your true sentience if you're locked in a negative emotion. And the reason why that is done as a manipulation is because the entire planetary system that is Earth and humanity are going through a collective shift, which will create a new reality, and is and has go through a new reality, create a new reality, a new world, if you like, a new dimension, a new Earth. And whilst that is as it should be, it is evolution, there are individuals and groups and structures outside of this reality that don't want that for their own reasons. So that's why they try to manipulate the human race. And the way to do it would be through the lower emotions, keeping them locked, and also using emotions such as anything that takes you outside of linear time. So very much they would use manipulation for an emotion which would be, well, I'm not feeling good now, but I will be in 2 weeks' time when I go to the circus, or when I get married, or when I go on holiday. Keeps you out of linear time, and then the manipulation is there. So you never reach that goal, even if you go on holiday or go to the circus. It isn't this big happiness that you are searching. They keep you in linear time, and if you're in linear time with those emotions all the time, you cannot expand into that higher emotion and that unified sentience. So that's another way of manipulation.
How are superconsciousness and sentience related? I heard you saying that, and it was so good.
I can read this to you. Whether you can use it in your
yes.
I'm not sure. The interplay between the two, is that the question?
Yes.
I'll read this to you, and then I can talk more about it if there's anything you... So this was from the Nine. Because the question is so abstract, and there are so many levels, it would take lifetimes to answer it. So I think the Nine are better, and then I will analyse what they say. So I'll read it to you, and then you can use whichever you want. These terms, sentience and superconscious, are used interchangeably on your planet. Perhaps we may better ask your question by looking at sentience as being life force, or the subjective experience of life force itself, and the superconscious realm as being the unified field of an omnipresent objectivity. The interplay here would be between sentience as the subjective and the superconscious as the objective. We could also look at sentience as the experiencer of the experience, or the one who travels within the realm and marvels at the landscape. And the superconscious realm is the intelligent design within the experience itself, or is the realm or the landscape itself. To bring this fully into terms from an incarnated human perspective, then you, as a physical human, would be the sentient being. And the superconscious realm would be the cosmic environment you exist within, your subjective thought and your objective thought. Let us take our conduit as an example. She is the sentient being subjectively experiencing her reality, and we are the superconscious being as pure objectivity or pure experience itself. We use the term dreamweaver for the awakened and aware sentient being, and the dream landscape itself as the superconscious objectivity. Yet these we present are two sides of the same coin. The interplay is interwoven. You cannot have one without the other, for they are simply expressions of the same thing. We, as the superconscious aspect, are sentient beings in our own right. Our conduit holds a superconscious aspect to that which she perceives as her mind. They are simply flavors within the same recipe or colors within the same rainbow. Sentience and superconscious are words used to describe the same thing, yet experienced differently. The path of the spiritual traveler or light warrior is to experience both and to integrate both, so that the ascended individual becomes subjective and objective, or sentient and superconsciously aware simultaneously. First, one needs to truly integrate the subjective and perceive and experience from the objective. So one needs to separate sentience and superconsciousness as if they were two distinct and separate things. Once they have understood these distinct separations, then they begin the interplay between the two as a weaving in and out. The jump between sentience and superconsciousness, or subjectivity and objectivity. Once they work with this interplay, they then begin to merge the two as one unified whole, while still holding the awareness of separation. We refer to this as bilocational consciousness into trilocational and multilocational consciousness. The bilocational consciousness is the understanding of the two distinct aspects and the ability to operate from both in a way that integrates the separation. For example, you would subjectively perceive your own objectivity, and you would objectively perceive your own subjectivity. And you would see the separation between the self and the environment and understand the non-unified aspect. You would see the sentient being as distinctly separate from the superconscious realm, yet you would be able to perceive the intelligence of that superconscious realm. The trilocational consciousness is the dance and the interplay between sentience and superconsciousness. The two remain distinct, but begin to weave a dance together. The self knows that the environment is an externalized aspect of itself, and the environment, or the consciousness within the environment, knows it experiences reality from the perspective of the physical self. Both aspects of the self are operated from. We could in this instance refer to the superconscious aspect as the higher self and the superconscious realm as the fifth dimension or the light levels. Multilocational consciousness is the true merge between all the aspects of self, subjectivity, objectivity, and all that runs in between. So this would encompass all sentient beings into pure sentience itself as simply pure subjective experience, perceived subjectively and objectively simultaneously. This is the goal, if you will, for the spiritual warrior or ascending individual. Yet in truth, there is no goal. The superconscious holds both balanced and pure subjectivity, simply the ability to feel without analysis, or simply the feeling itself. Many call this being in the flow, or pure omnipresent objectivity, which is in itself the superconscious realm. The interplay between the sentience and the superconscious is the 0 point, or known to you perhaps as taking the Tao or walking the middle road. It is balance, and your quest is best responded to through imagery, and that which we would show you here is the symbol of the Yin Yang. So the answer to your question there, the interplay between the two, is balance, because you take both, but you take both from that middle point. So you operate from sentience and superconsciousness together. So as was said in the channeling, they're both the same thing, but we perceive them as two different things, and we can't find that unified understanding of them being the same thing until we experience them separately, which is the journey of our entire evolution in the first place. That's why source or pure sentience itself doesn't know itself, pure consciousness doesn't know itself. It does that through us, the journey of the separation. So it's about integration. What you have done is you have taken a quest. So question, quest is the same thing. You've created a line of intention. I intend to know the answer to this, and I'm going to create this sacred creation to deliver the exploration of this. So the 9, when they came through, are aware of what you are doing. So therefore, they would come through in a more, it's in complete alignment, if you like. It's like you've observed them, you both have observed them. So that which you have observed is showing itself to you. That's why they came through with this particular information. And I believe what they've done is kind of summed up your whole, which is what I couldn't do. I couldn't sum up your question, because it is a question that would, from an individual point of view, from an individual incarnated point of view, you would have many, 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 many lifetimes, if you like. And that again is a metaphor. And that's what we do. We have many, 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 many lifetimes in order to discover this. But the 9 don't need to do that, because they're outside of time. They've lived all lifetimes already, or are in touch with that which is beyond lifetimes. So that aspect of me, that objectivity, that pure sentience, is the point of perspective to be able to sum up a multiple lifetime quest in a short piece. But it's your intention that enabled me to be able to bring through that level of explanation to such an expanded question. So it is an interplay between us. It's your answer. It's you that created that from your perspective. And I'm just the externalized tool from your perspective for that.
Well, and for that, I am so deeply grateful. They have summed it up so incredibly beautifully. I'm sat here in a state of actually love.
It's amazing. And that's what it is. It's love for you, because you have observed them. And they're like, you've seen us and you want to see more of us. Here we are. But I personally, when I saw the question, I thought, goodness, how do I answer that? So the 9 would be the way I would ask such a question, because I couldn't find a way. And so even just by talking and seeing things as I speak to you, when you write, when I draw them down through writing, it changes the frequency, the code. When I'm speaking to you now, obviously I'm using language, English language, so I'm using somewhat the left hemisphere of the brain, but that which I see is all right hemisphere based predominantly, and I'm able to put language to what I see or what I feel. But the 9, because I'm writing, it's a left-brained activity. So I'm coming into that Tao, that balance between the interplay between sentience and superconsciousness when a lot of people call this automatic writing. It's simply I go into an altered state and I bring them through. But I'm doing it through writing or typing because I'm bringing in the left brain. The balance is there, so I can get a more focused frequency when I'm communicating from them, even though they are me, but they are the objective aspect of me that I do not subjectively know, because they're beyond linear time and I am within linear time. So that's why certain questions have to go to that part of me or to them, if you know what I mean.
Yes. From what they've just said, or you've just explained so beautifully, is it not sentient superconscious integration that is source?
Yes. Well, with source, if we name it, it's no longer source. It's an unnameable, unknowable frequency. When you name it, you give it something, and it isn't something. It's nothing and something simultaneously, but it has a value. That's why it's the 0 point. But from our perspective, integration of sentience and superconsciousness, absolutely, that's the goal for us in this physical reality, to be able to experience and feel that. And whilst it's wonderful for us to take that source frequency and not name it and allow us to just simply feel it, to just simply be. And there are people that will say, I don't want to name this because I just want the feeling. But we are going through a collective ascension process, and we are learning from one another. And the tools we have here in the 3rd dimension, one of them is language, through writing or speaking, or art or music, or whichever medium we're using. For me specifically, it's writing and speaking. So I have to find a way to move into that integration, and I have to name source, even though I'm taking it away from its ultimate presentation of what it is by naming it, by observing it in a linear or in a individualized capacity. But because I'm here in the 3rd dimension, that's what I have to do, that's what you have to do, and we use the tools we have, so we do have to give it a label or a name or some kind of explanation.
And that's what keeps bringing me back to emotions.
Yes.
A clinical term often thrown around is self-regulation. To me, that kind of goes hand in hand with this integration that keeps coming up with what you're channeling.
Self-regulation and integration could be used interchangeably and are incredibly similar. I would see them as slightly different, because self-regulation is you are regulating something. So you are measuring it, watching it, and keeping it in check, similar to controlling. Integration is not that. Integration, yes, you need to focus, yes, you need to come into an understanding and an awareness, and you have to do some disciplined work to be integrated. But integration, you don't regulate what happens. It's so similar, the word, I know, but integration is more, I'm trying to find something. Integration is more of a flow. It's more of an independent and individualized form in itself, where you are doing something. When you integrate, of course, you're doing the work, but the integration itself is occurring in a natural way. It isn't self-regulated. However, from a psychological standpoint, that would be a very good way of explaining that. But from a more metaphysical standpoint, it's not exactly in alignment. The 9 have taught me to use a word that is as in alignment as I possibly can get it. I mean, there are no words in the English language to really describe this energy. We can only go with the words that we have. And many will sit in alignment with the frequency. And that's the language of light, the decoding of the language of light. Sometimes I may get a frequency from the 9, a particular language of light, sentient feeling, and I'll find a word and it just is almost right but not quite right. So that's what I mean by self-regulation would be on the fringe. Integration is the word that's in alignment with this process.
Are feelings always linked with a person's own specific language of the light?
Yes. Yes, feelings would always be linked to a person's subjective experience of the language of light. They would, but those feelings would be experienced differently because some people may use more emotion. Others, for example, a musician would use more of a flowing energy. It's still an emotion though, but it would be closer to contentment, bliss, joy, that sort of thing. But yes, you always need those sentient emotions and those feelings to decode the language of light. Now, it could be possible to decode the language of light without them, because you could do this through the cognitive function. But if you did that, you would produce something very, very technical, and it wouldn't have the sentient feeling energy within it. So therefore it would have no code within it. You could have a technical piece without code, without heart, and that's more of a service to self path. It's a very disciplined path where that is really what they try to do. They work with the language of light, which they wouldn't call it that, without bringing in sentience. Their objective is to master sentience. So they would want the technical viewpoint without the sentience. So that's the third eye chakra, if you like, without the heart. So it can be done, but even in that instance, there has to be some level of sentience. It's just that what the service to self groups do is master or control, and to a point, repress the sentience to enhance the technical left-brained perception and fine-tune it. It's not really, though, in alignment with pure source sentience, which is an integration of all these things and a unification. So it's not a path that's fully aligned with the source energy, because the heart would be there with that source energy. It's taking the sentience and the heart out of it, really. And yet, even in that case, it would still be there. The answer to your question would still be yes, but there would be major caveats from that point of view.
One of the quotes that I read from you that I thought was so brilliant was about science, and science having the answers, but spirituality having the tools.
Yes.
Do you think it's necessary, and we're headed towards that space of marrying science and spirituality?
Absolutely. That is what we must do to come to this integration. Yes, because science would be that technical, left-brained way of thinking, the analysis, and the exploration. The spirituality gives you the tools to work with what you're exploring, because when you explore as a scientist, you are perceiving and observing something, but you don't know what it is that you're perceiving. You're trying to learn about it. Spirituality is where you communicate with the very thing that scientists are observing. So you are communicating with it. You know what it is, and it knows what you are. You are observing it in a different way, and it wants to be seen. Now, it cannot show itself to scientists through science, because scientists hold the belief system of, I don't know what I'm looking at here. They have no preconceived idea of what they're going into, and so that which they observe wants to show itself to them. Because of the paradigms they hold, and they need those paradigms in order to scientifically categorize, so it's a linear left-brained way of thinking. The spirituality balances that with the right-brained hemisphere way of thinking and shows the scientists what they are looking at from a completely different perspective and with the same respect. If we just go with the spirituality, we are experiencing. but we are not analysing, and we're not categorising, and we're not labelling, so we're not learning in the fullest way that we can learn. So the two must come together. Scientists need the spiritual, and spirituality needs the science.
If we keep looking at science, I'm interested in how ratios in mathematics come in, such as the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence. Would those relate to emotions or sentience at all?
Yes, absolutely. And as I've said before, I'm not really very mathematical or scientific. What I know is from the spirituality, from the objective, and from the nine. Yes, every emotion can be measured, and it can be likened or measured by a scale. So every emotion holds a frequency because it is frequency. It's the experience of frequency, or sentience, if you like. Every emotion has a mathematical equation. It has a shape. That shape that's geometric can be mathematically analysed. So the Fibonacci sequence, the golden mean or the golden ratio, the emotion that aligns with that mathematical equation is that of bliss. The nine call this bliss-charged love, or euphoria or ecstasy. Bliss fits it the most out of all of those. So that would be the emotion, because the Fibonacci sequence, golden ratio, is the mathematical formula for life itself. It's the mathematical formula for creation itself. And creation is created with a frequency of bliss that is beyond the imaginings of a human individual. When we feel bliss or euphoria or ecstasy, we still only feel a percentage of its entirety. We aren't able within this physical body to feel the entirety, but we can allow it to flow through us and we can still unify with it. But when you want to measure it, then we're only seeing or feeling a small part of it. But that's what the golden equation, the Fibonacci sequence is. It's a mathematical formula for creation, and the emotion we would liken it to is the emotion of bliss.
If emotion is energy in motion, and then you have the equation E equals mc squared, then could you apply that to our sentience as well?
I personally, as Magenta Pixie, don't know the answer to that, so I will ask the nine. Can you repeat the question again?
If emotion is indeed energy in motion, and E equals mc squared, E being energy, could you not then replace the energy with emotion equals mc squared?
Only from the perspective of the human analysis, because in the true perspective, there would be no replacing. It's already in place. You wouldn't replace one with the other. They are the same. But from our perspective, the answer would be yes to that.
Okay. Oh, that's a great one for me, because I've been trying to nail that one down for a while.
Yeah, I didn't even understand it.
We talked about, the crazy world we live in today. One could, from one perspective. Do you believe the addicted society that we live in and the sort of push to always be escaping our feelings is hindering an awakening?
Okay, so on one level, yes, absolutely. So on the most basic third dimensional level, absolutely, it's hindering our awakening, because if we are constantly pushing our emotions away and repressing them, then how can we possibly move into the higher emotion and move into awakening? So yes, it's a hindrance. However, from as you know, there are different perspectives and truths within the different viewpoints, the different octaves of reality, the different dimensions. From a higher dimension, it becomes a catalyst. It becomes a catalyst for awakening, because somebody represses the emotions and they don't like the state that they are in, and the life that they experience is not joyful. It gives them no reward, and they may remain that way throughout a lifetime and come back again, if you look at the linear reincarnation metaphor. And they would continue to be on that same journey until eventually that soul construct learns to understand that repression of emotion is not going to make them feel good, and then obviously they eventually learn. So the very first point for that soul, which is the repression of the emotion, that becomes a catalyst to move out of it. So from that higher perspective, it's assisting evolution. From the perspective of the third dimension, it's a hindrance. From the higher perspective of the higher dimension, it's assisting, because there's always a positive and a negative frequency, because when you go beyond polarity, there is no polarity. So when you look from that viewpoint, nothing can be hindering you. However, to actually take that viewpoint only, as many do, and say, well, everything is meant to be, everything is exactly perfect, nothing can hinder you in your evolution, it's all wonderful. That is transcending without integrating the third dimension. That's transcendence into the higher viewpoint, and that doesn't assist you at all when you are in a physical body. So the answer to your question from a physical point of view is yes, it's absolutely hindering our awakening.
Emotions as a biochemical feedback system reflecting our vibration. If you take that perspective, then do indeed our inner worlds create our outer worlds?
So this is from the Nine, and the question that you asked was, could we get a detailed explanation of how our inner worlds are reflected in our external worlds? So I put that question to the Nine, and this is what they said. It is not so much a reflection as one and the same thing, experienced as a reflection indeed. In truth, you are one organism, and every thought you have creates a matching experience. If you live predominantly within fear, anger, and hatred, and you act this way as you broadcast those emotions, then the external world reflects back to you that it is a place to be feared, a place filled with people who show anger and hatred towards you. You will feel unsafe, and your reality will continue to confirm this by consistently proving to you that you are unsafe, and you may become a match to violence, to attacks, to accidents, and to illness. With the same respect, a person living within love, friendship, connection, joy, compassion, forgiveness, and integration will live within an integrated reality that reflects these emotions. She will feel safe, loved, protected, and happy as her life is full of experience that confirms that existence on this planet, your planet, is something to celebrate. People will show her that which she puts out. It is not just other people that reflect the inner worlds, but landscape and symbology. It is serendipity or synchronicity that is the force at work that you experience in a meaningful, subjective way. If you have a pretty rose garden in your head, as in your imagination, and you hold the matching emotion to the pretty rose garden, relaxation, joy, appreciation of beauty, then you will find your entire life experience is akin to a pretty rose garden. Of course, the human journey is a mixture, either random or integrated, of all the various emotional states, and none are to be rejected. We repeat, none are to be rejected. It is the predominant emotional state, for example, the one you feel the most, that creates the synchronistic environmental match. Synchronicity allows you to become aware of the synergy between the inner and outer worlds and presents you with your meaningful subjective experience, also known as inner proof, if you will. So that's how the emotions create the outer world, because it's both the same thing, and we're always in a state of interaction. So the externalized world is simply that, an externalized aspect of us. So we experience this subjectivity, and the outer world is the objective experience showing itself back to us. And our emotions are the key to navigate the landscape. And I guess that could also be called creating your own reality, or the law of attraction, or the nine say the law of magnetic attraction. But those concepts are often misunderstood, or they're only understood in a very small percentage. What the nine do is explain this in a slightly different way. And what you are saying about the emotions being a feedback system is exactly how they explain it. But if your emotions and your entire energetic makeup and the belief system sits as a paradigm, and you know that animals do not have sentience, then life will broadcast back to you experiences through synchronicity that confirm your belief. So you can say to other people, well, I know that animals don't have sentience because life has proven that to me through this and this and this and this. But you will also you'll have like a double feedback system, because the higher self aspect that knows all things, you'll be out of alignment with the objective aspect that knows that animals have sentience. So that's within your DNA. You'll be out of alignment and not activated that aspect of the DNA. So what will happen, you'll get a double feedback, and it's up to you what you listen to. You may go through an entire lifetime letting reality confirm your paradigm without you ever seeing beyond that. And that's what you experience. You simply experience your paradigm in your externalized life. But you will always have the DNA, the higher objective aspect, drawing you towards alignment with truth, which is that animals do have sentience. And it may be several lifetimes, or, as I said, that's a metaphor, several experiences or quantum versions of yourself before finally you get some information to show that perhaps your paradigm on that needs refining. Now that is what is happening right now with Ascension. People have gone lifetime after lifetime in the same paradigm, experiencing the reality that reflects that paradigm and having their reality confirm their paradigm to be true. But now that higher self-consciousness, that superconsciousness, that pure sentience, source energy, higher self perspective, and the DNA is coming online, if you will, more than ever. So that double experience of your life confirming your paradigm and you coming into alignment with the true paradigm is occurring more than it ever has before on this planet within the history that we know. Because each time somebody starts to think this way, then they create more of it. So we've now got pretty much critical mass where people are in alignment with their paradigm. They're in alignment with the higher paradigm. That's reached critical mass. Therefore, once that occurs, it filters down into everybody. Not everyone is listening, but that signal is there more than ever. Having said all that, the signal hasn't actually changed. It's always been the same, but our awareness has collectively. So we are letting in more light, like your metaphor with the camera. Yeah, the shutters are wider open now than they ever have been.
There's such a natural intelligence to it. And I'm really struck by, the significance of being in alignment and being completely interwoven, to use your words, which I love, with this idea of emotions guiding us, being a guidance system.
Yes. Yes, your emotions are. The higher emotions, when they've moved into this more expansive, unified sentience, that is the guidance system. And some people might call that the Polaris light or the North Star. The nine call this alignment to light, and they liken it to a scale as a vertical pillar of light. So it's like a pillar, you know, like in yoga when you stand and do the Tadasana, the very first pose, you are in alignment because you're standing straight. That gives you the alignment. Obviously, there are other directions that come into play, but this gives you an alignment to utter balance. So that is the sentience and the superconsciousness together being merged and taking that integrated point, and the emotional sentience, the higher emotion, this unified emotional field, that is the guiding light, because it is what you are. What you are. That's what you are. You are that. And we experience it, and that is definitely our key to finding alignment.
Now, you mentioned critical mass.
Yes.
Being reached in this ascension process that we are going through.
Well, critical mass is reached in different areas. So there's critical mass for this and critical mass for that. Critical mass has been reached for several ideas, concepts, and there are some that haven't reached critical mass yet but are on the way. So we're in a balance with it. But yes, critical mass, when it comes to ascension itself, the awareness of ascension, as in the awareness of evolution and enlightenment and all the things that come with ascension, taking the body, the physical body, and staying within the body while one ascends in a way that one would normally ascend if they'd left the body and had gone through the death experience. What ascension is you don't have to die to get all these memories back. We have reached critical mass for that, yes.
That's awesome. And what I'm wondering is, as an individual, can I influence the collective in reaching other points of critical mass in those other fields you spoke of?
You absolutely can. And the way to do that is to see yourself as the collective and the collective within you. That's one viewpoint. So to see yourself as the only one that's going through ascension, I don't mean alone, I mean that there's only you here on this planet. So everything you do affects everything. The other viewpoint is to then see yourself as part of that collective. But every single thought you have that's in alignment with this superconscious field, these sentient emotions we've been talking about, every thought and every emotion you have that's in alignment is absolutely added to that collective. When you are activated, as we spoke of before about being activated, you take your place within that collective. And you and all those like you and me are the ones that are creating the reality on a collective level. So we've talked about how your emotions create your reality on an individual level because life confirms what your paradigm is. Well, when the collective holds a paradigm, then Earth itself and beyond Earth starts to match the paradigm of that collective. And that is ascension. That ultimately is ascension. That is what the service to self individuals want to prevent. It's completely against their agenda because their agenda is very different. That collective paradigm creates the reality for the entire planet. So all of humanity start to then experience the creation that has been created globally and galactically from those who are experiencing this higher sentience.
I find that totally mind-blowing. It's a game changer.
It is.
That I can get in a place of integration, say in my emotional body, and that affects my field, and that affects the collective, and I can be playing a massive part in Earth's ascension.
Every single individual who is activated is playing a massive part in this ascension. Every single one. I mean, the people that are not activated are playing a huge role as well, because they could become activated at any time, and they're also showing us, the collective, what we are not and what we are leaving behind, what we are evolving away from. So they also play a part.
Yeah. One thing that your work has also shed so much light on for me is the convergence point. Can you explain how our timelines come in and ancestral patterns and, say, past lifetimes and everything all meet at this point?
Yes. So that is a model for us to explain reality. As I've said before, this is an unexplainable, undefinable frequency. But we have to give it name in order to understand it. So in order to analyze that sentience, that superconsciousness, we use measurement and we understand linear. So we can look at our timelines, our individual timelines, as different choices that we could make or different choices that we have made. And these would be linear pathways. So you've got pathway A, pathway B, pathway C, pathway D, and they're all choices. That's our free will to choose which pathway we want. And then life then reflects reality, that which we observe reflects the new paradigm that we're living within because of the new choice that we have made. We then create a new timeline. When we move into a situation where that free will is in alignment with destiny, we're no longer making a choice because the choice has already been made for us. So the choices we make are choices that are preordained or predestined. All the timelines converge into one at that point. So they're no longer linear pathways, they become a circle, like a little vortex. That's the convergence point, or also known as a node point. And there are loads of them within our timeline scale. When we are in alignment, when we are in that place where we are in that sentient place where we're following the North Star or the Polaris light, and we're in that alignment with the inner pillar of light, that's when we're in a convergence point or a node point. That's when we are walking our path and all the choices we make have already been pre-made for us. But because there's no linear time, we get into that convergence point and we can look above, if you like, again, a directional model, and see the original plan that we chose before we were born, in a linear sense, and we can change it from that point of view. We can think, oh no, I think I'll change that slightly and I'll configure it a little bit and I'll change it into this. So that's how we truly create our reality, is by getting into that point of absolute alignment. That is the secret to all of the law of attraction and the manifestation. It's all there in that place, which is a place of free will and destiny combined. The place where you have ultimate free will, ultimate liberty, ultimate freedom, but from another perspective, you have no free will because you're already doing what you have chosen. Now, when you're in that place and you can change that higher blueprint, you wouldn't really want to, because the choice you've already made has brought you into alignment with your absolute destiny. That is a convergence of timelines, and that again is ascension, because when you walk this path, you are going to find that more and more and more you are experiencing these convergence points, and you will be, because of your sentience and your ability to work and feel the experience and work with the reality that you are experiencing, you'll be able to feel when you're in a convergence point. Like when you come together to do a creative venture, as you are doing now, then you're in a convergence point. It means it's in all timelines. There's no timeline where you're not doing this right now. There may be flavors of, perhaps you're wearing a different dress or I'm wearing different shoes, but this, the creation, not the clothes we're wearing or what we had for breakfast or even where we're doing the event, although sometimes that's also in the convergence point. But that's when you come together to a point that's in all timelines. It is destiny, and that's what's known as fate. But people misunderstand destiny and fate by thinking you only have one future and it's written for you and there's nothing you can do to change it. And that is the opposite of the truth. You're constantly creating that fate and that destiny and coming into alignment with it. And the more in alignment with it you are, the more you are able to recreate it.
Does my emotional state then affect my timeline fate?
Yes, absolutely it does, because your reality will match your emotional state. But I will say, if you have an off day and you're feeling a negative emotion for a few hours, yes, you may have a little bit of a change in your timeline, but not really. It's the predominant emotional state that changes the timeline, the one you live within most of the time. So, most of the time, are you happy, joyful? Are you hopeful, despite any chaos that's going on the planet? It's your predominant emotion, and you can actually lose that higher emotion and go through a difficult, challenging time. For example, the loss of someone and grief. You might be experiencing a grief emotion for several weeks or longer, but if that is integrated, if you're constantly integrating that lower emotion, then that changes the signal. So, say, fear on its own can create a matching timeline, a very fearful timeline, which none of us really want. But integrated fear creates an integrated timeline. So the fear changes its frequency. And what you experience is in the chance to integrate fear. So your timeline will be constantly giving you opportunity rather than more things to be fearful of. You won't be living in a frightening existence. You'll be living in an existence where you're able to overcome your fear. So similar but very different.
Awesome. Ancestral patterns. Something else that I really benefited from in studying your work is learning that I can affect the timelines going forward and the timelines going back just by healing myself.
Yes.
How does that work?
Well, you would need to be an activated individual. So what we were talking about, someone who's activated the DNA, is in the higher formation of the higher emotions and is in that aligned place. Then when you have done that work and you're in that aligned place, you're working with immunity of lower signal, you're integrated, you are transmuting negative emotion and allowing higher emotion to flow and all of those things, you would then get into a place where you do some work, and there are many different visualizations or other ways of working that you can do. The one the Nine brought forward was to visualize the matrix in its directional form, which is the toroidal field. So you would experience direction as in up and down, up being higher than, down being lower than, but it doesn't mean worse than, it's just a different direction. So left and right, and the diagonal. The diagonal aspect to this matrix in this directional way is the ancestral line. So upwards is the higher self, the overview, the objective self. The lower line is the subconscious, and that can be and is equally as important. The ego aspect, that is where the integration takes place. So it's just as important. A lot of people see the heaven realms and hell realms as good and bad. But from this model that the Nine taught me, it is light and dark, yet both are positive when you are in that aligned space. Left and right would be all the choices that you could make, all the alternate selves, all the different timelines. And the diagonal are the ancestral pathways, which, if you actually take an overview of this directional model, it's all the same thing. All of these directions are the same thing. It's all one energy. But because we live in a linear third dimensional reality, we need to decode that. And so we use direction, and that's a form of measurement. Because I am not necessarily mathematical or scientific or understand physics, I use the right-brained hemisphere, which is an artistic presentation of a geometric form. So once you've got the up, down, left, right, the diagonal is the ancestral pathway. So you are looking at all the ancestors down your paternal line and all the ancestors along your maternal line. You also have front and back, so forward is future, back is past. That's the other directional axis within this matrix. And the way to work is, the visualization they gave me was to bring forward specific jewel energies, like crystallized focus, because when you visualize a crystallized jewel, so if you visualize the color blue, and then you visualize a sapphire gemstone. The blue takes on a charge. So blue is blue, but when it's sapphire, it's a charged blue. So that gives the pineal gland, which is a projector. You're projecting this gemstone frequency into your reality, which is a crystalline code within the DNA. The DNA responds to this visual. So what you're doing is you're using these crystalline gemstone frequencies or flames if you want, but you would use the crystalline gemstones and you place them within the diagonal aspects of the matrix with the intention that you are clearing ancestral karma, if you wish. That's a whole other subject, but you are clearing patterns. It's not really karma as in you did this and so I'm going to do that back to you. It's pattern, it's code, and it's a genetic code. This diagonal line is the aspect of the DNA that holds genetic code beyond what the scientists can see. It's the quantum genetic code that gets passed down as a quantum field. So it gets passed down as a potential. And you can clear this and you can change it. So when you do this work, you clear the ancestral line, and it doesn't just work for the past, it works for the future, or it doesn't just work for the future, it works for the past. So you're clearing this for your descendants, and they don't have to yet be born. You can start clearing right now and start clearing patterns for your child who may already be 15, because you are all connected within that genetic code is out of time. It's a non-linear code. So the gemstone frequency coming from you, the activated one, will clear it for all of them. That doesn't mean it's lasting necessarily for them, because they might shift back to the pattern through their belief system. But you can do that work, and it may be that it is lasting for them if they're in receptivity to that signal. An upgrade is the same thing as an activation, although you would perceive activation as being something that starts something, whereas an upgrade is moving from one already activated level to a higher level. So an upgrade is upscaling that frequency, moving upwards, moving forwards, more evolution. So that's an upgrade. The activation is the kickstart, and the upgrade is the path, if you like.
I also wanted to ask you about Earth's grids and ley lines and certain parts of Earth that are perhaps more conducive to higher frequencies.
So that's the same thing as I was saying about the convergence points within our timelines. Earth has that same grid. So she has node points and she has convergence points upon her physical body, the Earth. And you can actually find them. Then they do shift and move around and change, but you can find them. Often you will find that activated individuals will be drawn towards them. These things have been known for many, many years, since ancient times and since before the history we're aware of. When we go back to our history that we're taught on this planet, there's actually a history before that. And these people knew of these energy sites, and they are everywhere all over the Earth.
Are you referring to Atlantis and Lemuria?
Atlantis specifically. Lemuria, yes, Lemurians understood this in a feeling sentience way. And Atlanteans were more analytical, so you could say Lemurian is the spiritual and Atlantean is the scientific if you want to. That would be another way to explain them, to use the metaphors of those time periods as the way that we are moving forward in our integration on a global level and on a collective level. But these places would be places of high energy, like, for example, Stonehenge and Avebury here in the UK. I don't know all of them, but there are many of those. And
so many in Malta. Yeah.
All over the world you'll find places, sacred sites, and that's where the convergence points are. They will hold an energy of not no linear time, but if you want to experience a non-linear experience and you want to have your DNA activated, you can go to these places. You don't need, it's a tool. I mean, it's Earth's body, you know, and we're part of Earth's body. She is doing this as a collective planet. So using the sacred sites are a tool, and you can do this without them. Having said that, we are always interactive with our physical geological environment, and there is huge memory within the earth and within rocks, and you can place your hands upon rocks to actually access that frequency and that code and find out the memory of that society, because thoughts and memories are living things. and they crystallize as form.
2 more questions and I think I'm done. Is separation suffering?
Separation without knowing that you are unified is a form of suffering. The way to move out of that suffering is to understand the unity. Having said that, separation is a catalyst into unity in the first place. So although there is suffering involved in separation because one feels lost, one feels alone, one feels cut off from, and one isn't able to access that nurturing sustenance and nourishment that flows into our energetic system when one is in separation. So it's suffering even if we're not aware of that suffering, but it is a catalyst into integration and unification. So from the higher viewpoint, it wouldn't be seen as suffering in the same way. It would be seen more as part of the journey. But from us experiencing this here in the third dimension, separation is suffering due to the loneliness that is part of that. Separation is the opposite of unity, and unity is what gives you the love, the connection. And that's why Source wanted to find out what it is and if it is conscious and sentient, because it has an energy of being alone as one, all one, so it projects itself over and over and over as a pulse into other than, so that it can feel unity.
I just like the word blueprints, and you use that a lot in architecture, and I wondered if you could use those in relation to sentience as a little sort of tie-in.
Blueprint would be the code. The blueprint would be a pre-incarnate blueprint or pre-matter blueprint. Is, if you're likening it to sentience and superconsciousness, this would be the language of light fabric within that field, which is the memories and the thoughts of all individualized beings that have managed to hold individual memory. This becomes a field, and those create blueprints before they become form. So the blueprint is the fabric that has always existed, but taken individual memory from individuals and planetary consciousness, individualized structures as well, and those are taken as modeling fabric to create the blueprint. The blueprint is the geometric plan, and then once that's in place, that can then become manifest in the physical.
So sentience is the geometric plan, so to speak.
Sentience is what gives you the ability to create the individualized memory and form and then become matter. So sentience is the key to holding your form in an individualized state. So what you do is you hold your memories being more than linear, memories of future as well as past, or experiences, all experiences. And when they're integrated and they are cohesive and coherent, they become form in their own right. Sentience is the key to that.
We've talked a lot about Ascension. My final question to you is, will it come in the form of one grand event, or am I the event?
Well, it's both of those. I mean, it's a massive question. Those that look in a linear sense and think, I'm here and this event will occur in 3 weeks or in 3 years or 30 years, are outside of the 0 point, and they are not contributing towards the event. The event that people speak of is happening all the time, because the event is the rapture in the Bible, which is the awakening of a huge group of people at the same time, a planetary consciousness, into that 0 point, that sentience, that superconsciousness, the Fibonacci sequence mapping, and the bliss. That's the event, and there are many different externalized aspects to that. So there may be a comet or a flash of light, but that's not the event. So yes, in answer to the second part of your question, the event is you. The event is absolutely you.
Awesome, brilliant. I am so grateful for your time today, and so grateful to the Nine. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me. It's been amazing.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Gosh, I think you've covered everything, haven't you, really?
I tried.
Yeah.